The year 2000. The dawn of a new decade. And a new millennium. The noughties were the decade when advances in technology went into overdrive.
From your flip phones to a smartphone to a tablet to digital camera to a phone and a camera, and it just kept on changing.
Singapore's industries raced ahead, with Singaporeans blazing trails into new frontiers.
It was one of those moments where we said, okay, we've got to find a way to change the world. We've got to find a way to make a mark on the universe.
This was the decade when Singaporeans redefined who they were.
This is Q1.
And who they could be.
We become more concerned about the poor among us, the poor in the world, the planet that we live in.
They surpassed expectations, embraced their humanity, and chased their wildest dreams. January 1st, the year 2000. Like millions the world over, Singaporeans welcomed the new millennium with big parties. The dreaded digital doomsday, that nasty Y2K bug everyone feared, was a no-show. 1999 became 2000. And life in Singapore went on as it did before. Except for one thing, technology. Looking ahead, it was clear that for Singapore to be competitive in the 21st century, technology would be a game changer.
I think back then, the government had a really uphill task. Why? Because it was actually post the dot-com bust. There was a lot of negativity around the tech industry, while the government was really pushing ahead to try to get many people interested in entrepreneurship, startups, and things like that.
To breed the kind of innovators needed to keep the country ahead of the curve, Singaporeans needed something to nudge them out of their comfort zones. The beginnings of that something was a nail-biting, scream-inducing leap of faith.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, bungee!
Bungee jumping had been around since the mid-90s, but was considered too dangerous for Singapore.
Do that again! Whoa! How'd you go?
That changed in the 2000s, when risk-taking and pushing boundaries came to be seen as a recipe for success. In 2003, a new flipped-over version of bungee jumping hit Singapore. The G-Max, a reverse bungee ride, threatened to catapult passengers into the air to experience a whopping 5 Gs. That's a force 5 times that of gravity. But the organizers needed a test pilot to launch G-Max, someone who embodied this spirit of risk-taking. Enter celebrity MTV host Denise Keller, aka Miss Daredevil.
I think because people wanted me to be the rock chick and to be more expressive and a little bit more loud, I had an appeal to the boys. And the boys really wanted me to do a lot of daring things, like jump out of a plane and put lipstick on. There was a lot of attention of throwing up the first woman into this reverse bungee, and I loved it. I love anything to do with heights. I screamed my lungs out, and it made the front page of the newspaper. I don't know why it was so symbolic at that time, but I think it was maybe it was an expression of letting go.
Denise was an ideal choice to launch GMAX in Singapore. She was known for being hardcore and headstrong. Someone who boldly went into areas considered off limits.
Apart from the music and the fun, you have a very big responsibility to talk about subjects that are very sensitive and subjects that I think in Singapore at that time, it was a no-go zone. One of the first campaigns that I was involved in was MTV Staying Alive, which was addressing HIV and AIDS. And then that evolved into contraception, talked into about teenage pregnancies. And I think a lot of these subjects were very taboo. And I was asked to do a lot of the taboo subjects because I didn't have a problem talking about it, to be honest. I think it was empowering, and I think it was necessary. It was time to talk about subjects that were sensitive. Because there were teenage pregnancies on the rise, and nobody wanted to talk about it.
In the 2000s, Singaporeans let their hair down and pushed past their limits, even if it meant defying gravity. Tam Min Liang was also inspired to take the plunge. In 2005, he gave up a promising legal career and embraced his one true passion, gaming.
So I think the 2000s was a huge turning point, not just for me, but for the world, right? It was that moment where, that dream of flying cars and, a utopian society was supposed to come about. But I think we all went into the 2000s with a lot of forward-facing positivity and potential for the future. And it was one of those moments where we said, okay, we've got to find a way to change the world. We've got to find a way to make a mark. My parents had always told us, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, very traditional Asian parents. And, I went through law school. I actually enjoy the law, but gaming has always been the biggest passion for myself. And when I jumped into gaming, it wasn't necessarily just about an industry or a job. It's something I'm passionate about.
Min Liang took his hobby way beyond the next level. Today, his company, Razer Inc., is a world leader in gaming hardware and software. They are also at the epicenter of a new subculture.
Well, the gaming industry at that point of time wasn't really viewed like an industry. Pretty much it was more as a form of entertainment for kids. Things have changed dramatically since then. Us gamers, we've got our own lingo, we've got our own culture. And that's one of the reasons why Razer was able to kind of scale globally so fast, because it wasn't just a particular jurisdiction or geography that we're focused on. We're just focused on gamers everywhere. And there are like over 2 billion gamers out there in the world at this point of time. And we've really kind of grown alongside with it.
As it turned out, the secret to Razer's success was no secret after all. Creativity, innovation, and the willingness to take risks. These qualities would become the hallmarks of younger Singaporeans in the 2000s. They had a bold new spirit, and they weren't afraid to express it in brave new ways.
This is Kim Huat, Singapore #1 Ape fan.
If Singapore had a superpower, it would be the ability to shapeshift its economy. In the 2000s, it was time for another transformation. This time, it was to build a world-class knowledge-based economy.
It is the spirit of creativity, innovation, and multidisciplinary learning, and of socio-economic, intellectual, and cultural vibrancy that we want to help create. In the era of the knowledge-based economy, such qualities take on added imperative because they contribute to innovation, imagination, and the creation of new knowledge. key inputs in the future economy.
This was quite a tall order because creativity and innovation weren't exactly what the average Singaporean worker was known for. It was time for even more loosening up. Bar top dancing was then officially a no-no in Singapore. It was considered a safety hazard. But in the early 2000s, party animals were breaking rules and throwing caution to the wind. All in the name of a good time.
As the night goes on, the mood is there, and people want to feel elated, and they do it. Actually, bar top dancing is very common. Now, I think all in good fun and merrymaking, and and the night can be very, very, I would say, very happening, and people enjoy themselves. This is part and parcel of a night out.
In 2002, nightclub owner Dennis Fu found himself right smack dab in the middle of controversy. His bar had gotten into trouble for allowing 2 patrons to dance on its bar top.
The raid, I was quite curious because usually bar top dancing, though it wasn't permitted, but it was widely practiced, so to speak. And when my manager asked the authorities, and the authorities said, oh, there was a complaint. So, and I said, who's the complainant? And they couldn't tell me. So, now, and I thought I need to know this complainant because there are many competitors who complain and try to bring businesses down.
But Dennis needn't have worried because, to his surprise, quite a few Singaporeans supported him. They felt the ban on bar top dancing was putting creative expression in a cage. The ban was eventually lifted.
One day, I may go and see why dancing on the bar top get some people all excited. What I had done was to signal a shift in our mindset to being more relaxed and open-minded and less straight-laced and Victorian. I want Singaporeans to be self-reliant and robust. So I have to let you decide for yourselves the level of excitement and risk you want.
I would say it was for the betterment of Singapore as a society. It was a very momentary moment for me because bar top dancing, no matter how trivial kind of issue it is, it has translated into a transformation of Singapore. I think many other things followed, whether it is in terms of adaptation, in terms of innovation, the creative part of it, and exploring, breaking frontiers.
In this spirit of opening up, the Speaker's Corner was set up for Singaporeans to express themselves publicly. And they did with oration, exhibitions, demonstrations, and performances. But there was an even more open arena, one with hardly any regulations, and it promised both a wider audience and relative anonymity. By the mid-2000s, 6 in 10 Singaporeans had access to this new platform, the internet.
From using the internet for, say, leisure, government transactions, clearly then it becomes part of the entire usage or consumption diet to then want to consume information relating to policies and current affairs. And couple that with the ease of use of Web 2.0 technologies, almost everyone could be a publisher. It is so easy and almost costless for people to engage with one another on various online platforms.
Hello, this is Kim Huat, Singapore #1 Ape fan.
I think people always want to express themselves. It's just that there was no outlet before that. But you can't force discourse, or you can't make discourse happen without people wanting to express themselves, right? So I think that desire to make their opinions heard came from people themselves. We just happened to be the ones that were like the lightning rods for people to gather around and hang out.
I'm brave. The video is with toothbrush. I ride over you. I got a flight to catch.
Lee Kin Mun is widely regarded as the blog father of Singapore. Most people know him by his professional handle, Mr. Brown. In the 2000s, his posts and podcasts attracted thousands of online followers each day. While he's often been called a political commentator, Mr. Brown sees himself as just a guy who enjoys taking the mickey out of everyday issues.
I want to move house. I want to live dangerously.
The humor and the entertainment is what I care about. I just want to, have fun. I want people to laugh. I want, it's like gather at the coffee shop and just talk over drinks and beer, right? That's the fun I want to have.
Kim Wat heard the Cambridge assessment of the famous
I don't like
University of Cambridge lost
toxic trolling. I don't like over politicizing of things. I just enjoy, having fun. That said, because politics is such a large part of our lives, I mean, you can't run away from it. So you make fun of current affairs, somewhere down the line, you are making fun of politics at some point. You are commenting on politics, you're taking a position. But that's not something that I deliberately go out my way to do. Right? I'm the class clown at the back of the class, not the guy in front trying to take all the notes and raise his hands to answer all the questions. That's me at the back of the class making jokes and shouting silly things when the teacher is trying to teach.
But for every class clown, there's a class monitor. So in an age where just about anyone could play publisher, questions were raised about how much the government should play prefect.
Of course, any kind of, media that suddenly takes a life of its own is of concern to the government, right? And they have to figure out whether this thing is dangerous, whether this thing is productive. It was something new to them. It was new to us, people who were in the space. And they were figuring out. And sometimes the responses were a little bit heavy-handed.
Never mind, Singapore will prevail. We will grow our own fish.
And I say whatever came to my mind. They were a little bit prickly about it. But I think over time, they kind of realized that it's not a bad thing necessarily.
In technology news, there is now a new invention called a noise-cancelling beat.
All government wants to control information. And then also there's a sense of Singapore being small, and so you do want to direct flows of information, in certain ways. But on the other hand, because Singapore is small also, there's concern that if you control information too much, then you would stifle innovation, you would stifle business, you stifle the kind of thinking that would help Singapore in the long run.
Online blogs and forums gave Singaporeans a place to be heard on matters of the day. From the divisive decision to build integrated resorts, to hiccups in the train service. But this newfound space for virtually free communications also gave more insidious elements airtime.
The group had planned attacks on embassies, military establishments, and even an MRT station. It was news that shocked Singaporeans.
Jama'ah Islamiyah, or JI, were an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, the masterminds behind the September 11th attacks. In the 2000s, they killed hundreds of people in terror attacks in the region. In December 2001, their planned terror attacks in Singapore were thwarted by authorities. Had these taken place, many lives would have been lost at the hands of fellow citizens.
Singaporeans were involved, not only in JI, but some of them have traveled to Afghanistan, to the Philippines, to be trained by Al-Qaeda leaders. And this has also given an impact in terms of the security landscape in Singapore. I think it was the first time that Singapore faced what I call as the new terrorism, which uses religion in this regard.
As the digital landscape continued to evolve in the 2000s, so did the terror threat. To counter the spread of radical ideologies in Singapore, the Religious Rehabilitation Group was set up. Religious teacher and academic Muhammad Ali was roped in to help lead the battle against online radicalization.
Self-radicalized individuals, number one, they do not claim that they belong to any organization, but they were influenced by the writings of terrorist ideologues on the internet. And because of that, they made contacts through online platform to join the terrorist organization. Because at that time, there were so many radical websites developed by extremists and radicals, as compared to the so-called counter-ideological websites. So we established that website to counter extremist thoughts by uploading some of the counter-arguments through this website.
But terrorism wasn't the only deadly threat Singapore faced in the 2000s. The decade also saw the country being hit by one of the worst health crises in its history. The 2000s saw the birth of a number of Singaporean inventions that put the country on the world map for innovation, like the world's largest floating stage and pocket-sized data storage. While many innovators took years to bring their ideas to life, some had more urgent deadlines thrust upon them by necessity. In 2003, hospital engineer Goh Mia Siang was given a potentially life-saving challenge, one that had to be delivered like yesterday.
What actually happened is that I received a call for then the Chief Operating Officer, COO. He asked me, there's some strange disease that's happening in the ward. What can I do to improve the ventilation rate in the ward?
That strange disease was later identified as the deadly severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS.
Deadly new virus sweeps through the city, one of the most densely populated.
By March 2003, it was spreading fast among patients, medical workers, and caregivers at Tan Tock Seng Hospital, where Mia Siang worked. He had to find a way to contain the airborne virus and stop it from spreading through the hospital-wide ventilation system. Mia Siang worked against the clock with limited available resources to convert the rooms of SARS patients into isolation wards.
There was no time for us to do a renovation to convert the ward into isolation ward. Simplistically, what you do is actually draw the air from the corridor and the staff area, nurse stations, into the patient room, and then expel it out of the window. When out of the window, the viruses will naturally be neutralized by the ultraviolet outdoor and the absence of a host.
Mia Siang also set up a massive screening center in the hospital's car park, complete with a pharmacy, consulting rooms, x-rays, and other vital medical facilities. This allowed suspected SARS patients to be screened and treated without exposing those in the hospital to the virus.
all this has to be done within days, if not hours. So everything is like yesterday type of timeline. And if we really don't have a choice, it's like do or die. Singapore is a small island. There's no place for flight. The only way is to fight.
While Mia Xiang and a dedicated team of doctors and nurses were combating SARS in the hospital, another task force was hunting the virus at the airport. They were trying to intercept infected passengers before they had the chance to mix with the general population.
So typically a flight of 150 passengers will require probably 6 nurses, all geared up in their protective gear, using the thermometer, and individually check, monitor their temperature, measure the temperature, interview them. So such very time-consuming and laborious. As a matter of fact, I think it's even risky to the nurses.
A better mousetrap was needed, and fast. In less than 36 hours, defense engineer Tan Yang Hao and his team, together with an industry partner, ST Electronics, devised a solution.
Singapore is using a walk-through heat detector to check if air travelers arriving from China and Hong Kong have fever. It's the first country in the world to use a thermal imaging system at its airport to spot travelers with SARS symptoms.
The Infrared Fever Screening System, or IFSS, used military-grade thermal imaging technology to detect fevers instantly. Within 2 weeks, the IFSS was successfully deployed across air, land, and sea immigration checkpoints in Singapore.
So when we came out such a solution and able to use it as a first line of defense, it attracted worldwide attention because this is really a solution that efficient and, as a matter of fact, very simple to use. In this way, we can actually minimize the skilled manpower needed at the airport. So the nurses, etc., they can go back to the hospital because the hospital was really, really taxed.
Singapore's IFSS would end up being used by other SARS-stricken countries. It also received numerous accolades, including one from Silicon Valley's prestigious Tech Museum of Innovation.
We never think about whether we'll win any prize. Really, the focus is helping to make the solution work properly. But months later and years later, when all these accolades, were given to us, yeah, indeed, my team are actually very, very pleased that our work not just contributed to the nation in the fight of the SARS crisis, but also derive recognition for the engineering innovation.
After 3 tense months, Singapore was declared SARS-free in May 2003. In the wake of the epidemic, a total of 238 Singaporeans had been infected, and 33 lost their lives. Many of those who were directly involved in the fight against SARS emerged from the crisis with a renewed sense of hope for the future.
During that episode, actually, I personally see how public service, the top civil servants, the ministers, and many other people, the healthcare worker, etc., are totally devoted, to support the nation. And that is something that rejuvenated me, and I, in fact, heightened my commitment.
We are getting a lot of support from the people of Singapore. We get a lot of encouragement from different walks of people. We get from emails, cards, and even small treats like a bento box sending to us. It makes us, it gives us, it reminds us that we are not alone.
The swift and innovative manner in which Singaporeans tackled the SARS crisis won critical acclaim from observers across the world. It also caught the attention of renowned scientists Sir David and Birgit Lane in the UK. In 2005, they answered the call by Singapore's Agency for Science, Technology and Research, or ASTAR, to help develop the country's first biomedical hub. Biopolis was built in 5 phases between 2001 and 2014. It was a bold billion-dollar investment in life sciences, a new frontier Singapore was trying to navigate in the 2000s. The goal was to improve the quality of healthcare through state-of-the-art R&D.
We've already got a base, we've done a lot of work, we've got scientists here, we've got a reputation, and we're beginning already to see results. And we're going to put more investment into biomedicine so that we will be able to do clinical research. In other words, take projects from the lab to the bedside in the hospital, so that we experiment to discover how we can treat patients best, which treatments work, what is the best procedure, how we can not only get the R&D results, but also improve medical services and medical care in Singapore.
If you reflect on it, to think that Singapore could just make this decision to become a real hub for biomedical research and then deliver on it to the extent it has in 15 years is a reflection of the willingness to take risks and to try new things. And I think there was a great buzz.
I think one of the biggest challenges early on was the scepticism overseas. You really had to sort of talk it up and convince people that this was something they should take seriously. Then by the time we started to manage to bring people who were quite well known in their field into Singapore, and as the community grew, people could see this was real and people were very impressed by the names that were coming into Singapore, and that really changed things, I think. We needed those people. I mean, it wasn't just for the reputation of Singapore outside, we needed those experienced people to help train the youngsters in Singapore, set examples for them and be their role models.
In a little over a decade, the Lanes, along with hundreds of fellow researchers in Singapore, helped broaden the medical industry's understanding of a number of diseases like cancer and dengue. They also contributed numerous solutions to some of the world's most pressing healthcare concerns.
Hi, how's it going? We've made tremendous progress. Singapore might be the home for a really good treatment for dengue, which would be great. I've seen some of the first people we employed, do really well and get very senior jobs, and that's very satisfying and kind of makes you feel you've laid a foundation for the future, because in the end, it's the young people that we're going to make the difference.
One young scientist who did make a difference in the decade was Dr. Chet Jawa. In the 2000s, he conducted a radical experiment which highlighted the huge potential life sciences could have for Singapore. He produced the world's first glow-in-the-dark orchid. Dr. Chia beat researchers in the United States and Japan to achieve this result.
The reason for doing that is to, 1, showcase the technology, 2, showcase that our national flower, which is an orchid, now can glow in the dark.
To make Singapore's national flower glow, Dr. Chia successfully fused the orchid's genes with those of the firefly without creating any mutations. In doing so, he broke new ground in gene manipulation and cross-species genetics.
Now, when we play with life sciences, we can add value and we can also cure disease. So diseases and also make the genes better. I think this is something that we can help to move science to the next level. And to me, that is a very good showcase that despite being small and despite being a newcomer into this arena, into this high technology, we could still beat the advanced country. I think this is something that will give us confidence and pride to do well into the future.
On the back of such life-changing discoveries, Singapore's life sciences sector grew to become a multi-billion-dollar industry. But scientists weren't the only ones pushing boundaries in the 2000s. The decade also saw Singaporeans going to great lengths to achieve their goals and pursue their passions, even if it meant going against the tide. In the 2000s, Singapore continued to collect superlatives. The world's first fully automated underground metro, the world's best airline, and the world's #1 seaport. Within 4 decades, the country had moved from third world to first. And with this came first world tastes. In well-disciplined Singapore, of course, these were pursued in more or less the expected orderly fashion.
The queuing culture, if you use the word correctly, is definitely there in Singapore. Wherever you see there's a queue, tendency is a lot of times we will just join, not knowing whether is it what we wanted.
But in the 2000s, hordes of Singaporeans queued enthusiastically for something they knew they really wanted and absolutely had to have. In the year 2000, 300,000 Singaporeans queued for 40 days and 40 nights at McDonald's outlets just to get their hands on limited edition Hello Kitty plush toys. This was the deal. For around $7 US, you'd get a Mac value meal and a plush toy. And all you had to do was line up for 3 hours. For queue-friendly Singaporeans, no problem. Except this time, things weren't always friendly, as toy collector Steve Lim found out.
A lot of fights happen is because of, some of our friends coming in just to replace the guy who is queuing. I remembered the one at Boon Keng McDonald's, which was very highly reported. The glass panel actually broke rather, and injuries and fights within the outlet itself. And youngsters, the school-going, maybe secondary students, they actually buy the meal with the toy. After that, all the meals, they just dispose it.
While Singaporeans certainly went to extreme lengths to realize first world aspirations during the 2000s, they also devoted more time and money to altruistic causes. Donations to charities went up, as did the number of Singaporeans volunteering to one cause or another.
The 2000, Singapore has already transformed from a third world country to a first world country. When a person is able to take care of himself, he can start to think about taking care of others. We become more concerned about the poor among us, the poor in the world, the planet that we live in.
In 2001, construction company boss Jack Sim led by example. He sold off most of his assets and set up an NGO. The cause Jack chose to champion was a dirty job, but someone had to do it.
I reckon if I want to do service, then I should do the one that nobody wants to do. Because so many NGO has to do whatever the donor wants, where there is funding. So sanitation, toilet, shit, poop, these are embarrassing subjects that nobody wants to fund. So it is best to focus on what is neglected. So the people in the rural area, in the slum, every morning they go to open defecation on the roadside, in the bush, next to the river, next to the railway track. And that is where they get raped, molested. So their modesty, their dignity is compromised. So I think sanitation is so important for preventing disease, for preserving dignity.
Jack founded the WTO. Well, the other WTO, the World Toilet Organization.
So basically, we are going to Xi'an to build the 28 school toilets.
To date, Jack's WTO has helped build thousands of modern toilets in schools and communities in over 50 countries. His mission may not be glamorous, but it improves the quality of day-to-day living for millions of people.
We work so hard to get sanitation on center stage. Our advocacy have to fight against very glamorous agenda like the panda, the polar bear, climate change, Kim Kardashian, football, Donald Trump tweets. Against all this glamorous agenda, poop and shit have no place. 30 to 40% of the world population today still don't have proper sanitation, so they are suffering the same as us in the 1960s. So their rivers, which are supposed to give them source of life, clean water, is now contaminated by shit. And so they get sick.
The health of the natural environment would also become the focus of eco-conscious Singaporeans in the 2000s.
So can you see there's a cluster of rocks? The big one is...
Siva Soti is a university lecturer and a devoted environmentalist. In 2001, he and a team of nature lovers led members of the public on up-close and personal visits to a secluded beach on the offshore island of Ubin. This was Chet Jawa, and it was hailed by the scientific community as a treasure trove of biodiversity.
Singapore, since independence, had reclaimed a lot of coasts. We had built a lot of reservoirs. So untouched coast is a rarity. And Chet Jawa had multiple ecosystems in one place. So it's like a hawker center with a lot of different kind of food. There was mangrove, there was seagrass patches, there was coastal hill habitats, there was coral rubble, sandbanks, and all of this teemed with life.
But this ecological haven was under threat. Chet Jawa had been slated for redevelopment. So when Siva and his team arrived, their sole purpose was to collect memories before this natural wonder was lost. Instead, they left inspired and with a new game plan to campaign for Chet Jawa's preservation.
Eventually, hundreds and thousands would end up visiting Chet Jawa over the 2 months. They wanted to see and they wanted to know and they wanted to conserve. So we captured thoughts and expressions and compiled it the same way we had compiled scientific information. We are now compiling how do people feel. And we decided to share that at government as well.
Their citizen-led campaign paid off. Chet Jawa lived to see another day. The government put their development plans on hold for a decade, a term that's since expired. While Chet Jawa's fate is still up in the air, Siva feels the success of their efforts to save it in the 2000s opened new doors for environmentalism in Singapore.
Chet Jawa was a turning point. We didn't expect the crowds that came, nor the enthusiasm. Still, there's more to do. And there is a master plan for conservation, so we have to keep a very careful eye to see that it gets realized to its full potential. So the effort will come from government as well as from society.
So it's good to see that there are more people who are aware of such things. This can be a very important repository for planners in the future, for people trying to restore and reconnect ecosystems. So there is a hope always.
Given Singapore's shaky start with independence in the mid-60s, hope has been that precious something that's kept Singaporeans going these past 5 decades. No matter how bad things got, they weathered the storms, got back up on their feet, and with determination, they kept moving forward. And along the way, they helped write the history of the city-state they call home.